Hello, and welcome to Lore and Sleep. Tonight, we travel to the warm southern coast of Italy, to a bay so beautiful that wealthy Romans built their finest holiday villas along its shore, where grapevines climbed the fertile lower slopes of a mountain that had stood quiet, green, and seemingly harmless for so many generations that the people living in its shadow had entirely forgotten it was a volcano at all. We are going to Pompeii and to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 of the Common Era, one of the single most famous natural disasters in all of recorded history, an event that destroyed an entire, thriving Roman city and its neighbors in the space of about a day, and that, through the strange and terrible preservation the disaster itself provided, left us the single, most complete, and most intimate surviving portrait of ordinary daily life anywhere in the ancient Roman world. This is the story of a mountain that woke without real warning, of a Roman naval commander named Pliny, who sailed directly toward the danger to help others and did not come home, and of an entire city, its bakeries with bread still in the oven, its walls still covered in fresh election graffiti, and casual jokes scratched by ordinary passers-by, its wine bars still holding half-finished cups, buried so quickly and so completely beneath ash and pumice that it was, in the most literal sense, frozen in time, waiting nearly 17 centuries in the dark before anyone thought to dig deep enough to find it again. It is a story of catastrophe, certainly, but it is also, in its own strange way, a story of extraordinary preservation, since the same volcanic violence that killed so many thousands of people also gave later centuries something no other ancient Roman city could offer: a genuinely unfiltered, unedited window into exactly how ordinary Romans actually lived, worked, argued, and loved on one single ordinary morning in late summer that turned out to be the last. It is a story that belongs to the night, though the disaster itself unfolded mostly in daylight because so much of what followed happened in darkness, an actual, physical darkness that survivors described as blacker than any night they had ever known, ash blotting out the August sun so completely that people could not see their own hands in front of their faces. Let it come to you now, slowly, out of the warm Campanian dusk, the lamps of a peaceful Roman resort town glowing softly along its quiet streets. The mountain above it, still green, still quiet, still for one more night, entirely unremarkable. If these journeys bring you calm, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, or leave a quiet thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way here, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, there is nothing you need to do. Let your body grow heavy. Let your breathing slow. Let the warm evening air of the Bay of Naples come to you out of the darkness, the sound of the sea, the smell of grapevines, and a quiet green mountain standing patient against the sky. Let us begin. The Bay of Naples, on the western coast of southern Italy, in the Roman region known as Campania, was, by the middle of the 1st century of the Common Era, one of the most desirable and most densely settled stretches of coastline anywhere in the entire Roman world. Its mild climate, fertile volcanic soil, and genuinely stunning natural beauty having attracted, over the preceding several centuries, a rich mixture of settlement including Old Greek colonial cities, Oscan-speaking native Italic communities, and, increasingly, as Roman power expanded across the peninsula, wealthy Roman citizens who built lavish coastal villas along the bay specifically to escape the heat, the noise, and the political pressures of the capital. During the summer months, a pattern of elite seasonal migration that made towns including Baiae, Herculaneum, Stabiae, and Pompeii itself genuinely fashionable resort destinations for exactly the kind of senatorial and equestrian Roman families whose wealth and leisure the wider empire's vast provincial tax revenues ultimately supported. The wider volcanic geology of the Campanian region extended considerably beyond Vesuvius itself, encompassing the Phlegraean Fields, a large volcanic caldera system lying just to the west across the bay near Naples and Baiae, an area whose own numerous hot springs, sulfurous vents, and periodic seismic activity were, in fact, considerably better known and considerably more actively discussed in surviving Roman geographic and scientific writing than Vesuvius's own dormant volcanic character, since ancient authors, including Strabo, specifically described the Phlegraean Fields in explicitly volcanic terms while treating Vesuvius itself as a separate, seemingly extinct or at most mildly unusual geological feature, a genuine scholarly blind spot that meant even the relatively sophisticated natural philosophy available to educated Romans of Pliny the Elder's own generation had not connected the dormant mountain looming over Pompeii with the same underlying volcanic processes that these other, more visibly active regional features so clearly displayed. Pompeii's connection to the wider Roman world depended substantially on the region's well-developed network of paved roads, linking the city to Rome itself, to the major regional port city of Puteoli on the western side of the bay, and to the numerous other Campanian towns and cities scattered across the fertile surrounding countryside, a road network whose broader Roman engineering, already discussed in this channel's earlier coverage of Roman Britain's own road-building efforts, found in Campania's own considerably older and more thoroughly developed provincial infrastructure, one of its most mature and most heavily utilized regional expressions anywhere in Italy itself, supporting the constant movement of agricultural goods, manufactured products, and travelers, from wealthy senators visiting their own seaside villas to ordinary merchants hauling wine and garum toward the wider Mediterranean shipping routes that sustained Pompeii's own considerable commercial prosperity throughout the decades preceding its destruction. Pompeii itself had a considerably older history than its final Roman era incarnation might suggest, having originated as a settlement of the Oscan people, an indigenous Italic population, sometime around the 6th or 7th century before the Common Era, before passing through periods of Greek and then Samnite cultural and political influence, and finally coming under direct Roman control following the social war of the early 1st century before the Common Era, a conflict fought between Rome and several of its Italian allied peoples over the question of full Roman citizenship rights, after which Pompeii was formally reorganized as a Roman colony, populated in part by resettled Roman military veterans, whose own presence and whose own considerable landholdings within the reorganized city likely produced some genuine and lasting social tension with the town's older, pre-Roman resident population, a layered history of successive cultural influence and occasional friction still visible today in the city's own preserved architecture, in surviving inscriptions written in the older Oscan language alongside Latin, and in the particular blended character of Pompeian civic and religious life that this episode's later chapters will examine in considerably more detail. At the time of its destruction, Pompeii was a genuinely substantial provincial city by the standards of the mid-1st century Roman world, home, according to modern archaeological and demographic estimates, to somewhere between 10 and 20,000 permanent residents, a population supported by a diversified local economy, combining agricultural production from the surrounding countryside, including the wine and olive oil industries, that Campania's exceptionally fertile volcanic soil made especially productive, with considerable local craft manufacturing, including a notably significant fish sauce or garum production industry associated specifically with Pompeii and documented through numerous surviving amphorae, stamped with the names of specific local producers, alongside a genuinely active local commercial and retail economy, visible today in the extensive surviving remains of the city's shops, bakeries, and taverns. A combined economic base robust enough that the city had, in the years immediately preceding the eruption, been actively engaged in a considerable program of post-earthquake reconstruction since a serious earthquake in the year 62 had already damaged large portions of the city, leaving numerous buildings still under active repair at the very moment Vesuvius finally erupted 17 years later. Herculaneum itself, the smaller and somewhat wealthier neighboring town that this episode will return to repeatedly in later chapters alongside Pompeii, occupied a coastal site considerably closer to Vesuvius's own base than Pompeii, its own particular character, shaped by a genuinely high concentration of especially luxurious seaside villas belonging to some of Rome's wealthiest families, a smaller and more exclusively affluent settlement than Pompeii's own considerably larger and more socially diverse urban population, a demographic contrast between the two neighboring towns that later chapters, examining both the eruption's differing physical effects on each settlement and the differing character of their surviving archaeological remains, will explore in further comparative detail. Mount Vesuvius itself, rising to the north of Pompeii and dominating the entire surrounding landscape, had not erupted, according to the best available modern geological evidence, for well over 1,500 years before the catastrophic eruption of 79, a genuinely enormous span of dormancy that meant no living person in the entire region, and indeed, no reliable oral or written tradition preserved among the local population retained any accurate understanding that the mountain was actually a volcano at all, rather than simply an unusually large and fertile hill, whose lower slopes, covered in vineyards and farmland right up to a considerable height, represented some of the most productive agricultural land in the entire region, a tragic irony that later geologists and historians have specifically emphasized, since it was precisely the volcano's own centuries of accumulated volcanic soil that had made the surrounding countryside so agriculturally desirable and so densely settled in the first place, setting the stage, entirely without the knowledge of anyone living there, for a catastrophe whose eventual human cost was directly proportional to how successfully the region's earlier volcanic dormancy had encouraged exactly this kind of dense settlement. Vespasian's own considerable practical achievements as emperor, including the ambitious construction program that produced Rome's own famous Flavian amphitheater, better known today as the Colosseum, begun during his reign and completed under his son and successor Titus, who was, in one of history's more poignant coincidences, the very emperor actually reigning at the moment Vesuvius erupted having succeeded his father only a couple of months earlier, meant that the wider Roman state's own considerable administrative and financial resources were, at the precise moment of the Campanian disaster, being directed toward exactly this kind of ambitious public building program, resources that Titus would now need to partially redirect toward organizing and funding disaster relief efforts for the affected Campanian region, including, according to surviving ancient accounts, appointing a special senatorial commission specifically tasked with coordinating reconstruction assistance and resettlement support for displaced survivors. One of the earliest, well-documented examples of organized Roman imperial disaster relief, responding to a specific natural catastrophe on this considerable scale. The wider Roman world of this same general period, the later reign of the Emperor Vespasian, who had recently founded the Flavian dynasty following the chaotic civil wars that had followed the death of the Emperor Nero a decade earlier, was one of relative political stability and considerable Roman confidence in its own institutions and its own understanding of the natural world, a confidence reflected in the genuinely sophisticated, if by modern standards still quite limited, scientific and geographic knowledge that educated Romans of the period, including the naturalist and naval commander Gaius Plinius Secundus, known to history as Pliny the Elder, whose own scholarly work and whose own final, fatal actions during the eruption itself will feature prominently in this episode's 5th chapter, possessed regarding earthquakes, volcanic activity, religious life in Pompeii, and the surrounding towns of Campania, reflected the same broad Roman polytheistic framework that structured religious practice across the wider Roman world, centered on the worship of the major Roman state deities, including Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, whose combined cult, known as the Capitoline Triad, was formally honored in Pompeii's own dedicated Capitolium Temple, standing prominently at the northern end of the city's central forum, a physical and religious arrangement deliberately modeled on the same triad's principal temple on Rome's own Capitoline Hill, reflecting Pompeii's own civic identity as a properly constituted Roman colony, fully integrated into the empire's wider religious and political structure. Alongside these official state cults, Pompeii's surviving archaeological record reveals an extraordinarily rich and genuinely diverse wider religious landscape, including dedicated temples to Apollo, whose sanctuary near the Forum ranks among the oldest religious structures in the entire city, predating the Roman colonial period and reflecting the earlier Greek and Samnite religious influences already discussed in this episode's 1st chapter, and to Venus, whose particular association with Pompeii reflected both the goddess's wider Roman identity as a patron of love and beauty and a more specific local civic identity, since the Roman dictator Sulla had formally renamed the reorganized colony Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum in the early 1st century before the Common Era, placing the city under Venus's own specific divine patronage as part of the same colonial reorganization already discussed in this episode's opening chapter. The cult of Isis, an Egyptian goddess whose worship had spread widely across the Roman Mediterranean world during the preceding 2 centuries as part of a broader pattern of religious exchange and adoption that characterized Roman imperial religious life more generally, maintained a genuinely significant and, based on the temple's own well-preserved surviving remains, actively used sanctuary within Pompeii itself, evidence of the same wider Roman religious pluralism and eclecticism that allowed foreign and originally non-Roman deities to be genuinely and enthusiastically incorporated into Roman civic and private religious practice, provided they did not directly threaten the empire's own political and social order. A pattern of religious accommodation, this same channel's earlier coverage of Carthage and its own religious syncretism has already explored in a rather different Mediterranean cultural context. The Temple of Isis at Pompeii, excavated with particular care during the 18th century and generating enormous contemporary European fascination precisely because it was recovered in such remarkably complete and undisturbed condition, complete with surviving cult statues, ritual furniture, and even traces of the last offerings left by worshippers, including eggs and other food items found still in place upon its altars, provided 18th century European audiences with one of their very first genuinely direct physical encounters with an actual functioning ancient religious space, rather than merely its later literary description, a discovery significant enough that it directly influenced European artistic and decorative fashion of the period, including inspiring Mozart's own use of Egyptian-influenced imagery in his opera The Magic Flute. Composed only a matter of years after the temple's own celebrated excavation and public description had begun circulating among fashionable European audiences. The surviving fresco depicting this amphitheater riot, discovered during excavation and now preserved in the Naples National Archaeological Museum, alongside the great majority of Pompeii's most significant surviving movable artworks and artifacts, provides a genuinely rare visual record of a specific, individually documented ancient event, rather than the more typically generic or mythologically themed subject matter that dominates the great majority of surviving ancient Roman painting depicting the amphitheater itself, the surrounding awning structures used to shade spectators, and the chaotic violence of the riot itself, with a level of specific topographical and narrative detail that modern historians have found genuinely valuable for reconstructing both the amphitheater's own original appearance before excavation altered it and the specific visual conventions ancient Roman artists employed when depicting contemporary rather than mythological or historical subject matter. Household religious practice in Pompeii, reconstructed by modern archaeologists through the extensive surviving evidence of domestic shrines or lararia found within the private houses that make up the overwhelming majority of the city's excavated remains, reveals a genuinely intimate and continuously maintained dimension of ordinary Pompeian religious life, operating alongside the wider civic and temple-based cult practices already discussed, since nearly every excavated Pompeian household, from the grandest aristocratic villa to the most modest working-class dwelling, maintained its own small domestic shrine dedicated to the household's guardian spirits, the Lares, and to the protective spirit of the male head of household himself, the genius, honored with small daily offerings of food, wine, and incense that archaeologists have found physical traces of preserved in remarkable detail at numerous excavated sites across the city. The roads leading out from Pompeii's principal city gates most notably along the road toward the neighboring town of Herculaneum, were lined following standard Roman practice of situating burial grounds outside the formal boundaries of the living city, with an extensive necropolis of family tombs and funerary monuments, many bearing genuinely detailed inscriptions recording the names, civic offices, and personal achievements of the deceased, providing modern historians with a further significant body of evidence regarding specific named Pompeian individuals and families to set alongside the domestic and commercial evidence already discussed in this episode's other chapters. And among these surviving funerary monuments, the tomb of Eumachia, a wealthy Pompeian priestess and public benefactor who funded the construction of a substantial public building on the forum itself associated with the city's wool and textile trade guild, stands as one of the most architecturally significant surviving examples, illustrating the genuine civic and religious prominence that wealthy Pompeian women, despite their formal exclusion from holding political magistracies themselves, could nonetheless achieve through exactly this kind of prominent public religious office and civic benefaction. Pompeii's own considerable amphitheater, one of the oldest surviving stone amphitheaters anywhere in the Roman world, having been constructed considerably earlier than Rome's own far more famous Colosseum, hosted gladiatorial games that, while not strictly religious ceremonies in the narrower sense, carried genuine ritual and religious significance within the wider Roman cultural understanding of such spectacles as offerings connected to funerary commemoration and to the maintenance of proper relations between the living community and its ancestors and gods, and the amphitheater's own considerable local significance is further evidenced by a genuinely famous surviving incident, a riot that broke out between Pompeian spectators and visiting spectators from the nearby rival town of Nuceria during a gladiatorial contest in the year 59 of the Common Era, a violent disturbance serious enough that the Roman Senate itself banned gladiatorial games at Pompeii for a full decade as punishment, an episode preserved both in the surviving account of the Roman historian Tacitus and in a genuinely vivid contemporary wall painting discovered during the city's own later excavation, depicting the riot itself in considerable pictorial detail. Pompeii's physical layout, preserved with a completeness that makes it, even today, one of the single most valuable archaeological resources for understanding ordinary Roman urban life anywhere in the ancient world, centered on a rectangular form at the city's southwestern quarter, surrounded by the city's principal civic, religious, and commercial buildings, including the previously mentioned Capitolium Temple, the city's basilica serving as its principal law court and commercial exchange building, and various other temples, market buildings, and public administrative structures, all arranged according to the same basic principles of civic urban planning that characterized Roman city design across the empire more broadly, adapted here to the specific, somewhat irregular street grid that Pompeii's own older, pre-Roman urban development had already established long before its formal Roman colonial reorganization. Pompeii's basilica, standing at the southwestern corner of the Forum, and among the largest single-roofed structures in the entire city, served as the town's principal center for legal proceedings and significant commercial transactions. Its considerable internal colonnaded space, originally covered by an impressive timber roof structure that did not survive the eruption's destructive weight of accumulated ash and pumice, providing local magistrates and litigants with a genuinely substantial covered venue for exactly the kind of formal, legal, and commercial business that a properly functioning Roman provincial city required, and the building's own surviving walls preserve, alongside the more general, decorative graffiti already discussed elsewhere in this chapter, a number of specifically legal and commercial notations that modern historians of Roman law have found genuinely useful in reconstructing the actual practical operation of provincial Roman civil justice at the local level. The city's streets themselves, paved with large polygonal stone blocks and equipped with raised stepping stones at intersections, allowing pedestrians to cross without stepping directly into the street-level channels that carried rainwater and waste preserve in the deep wheel ruts worn into their stone surfaces by centuries of cart traffic, a genuinely tangible physical record of the ordinary daily commercial and social traffic that once filled them. And the walls lining these same streets preserve an extraordinarily rich body of surviving graffiti, thousands of individual inscriptions scratched or painted by ordinary Pompeian residents, recording everything from political campaign endorsements for local magistrate elections to advertisements for gladiatorial games and theatrical performances, to deeply personal expressions of love, humor, insult, and occasionally quite explicit sexual content, providing modern historians with an unfiltered, genuinely direct textual window into ordinary Pompeian voices and ordinary Pompeian daily concerns that survives from almost nowhere else in the ancient Roman world with anything approaching this same volume and this same unmediated, unofficial character. Pompeii's considerable public bathing complexes, including the well-preserved Forum baths and Stabian baths, reflect the genuinely central role that public bathing played in ordinary Roman social and daily life, providing not merely hygienic washing facilities, but genuine social and recreational spaces where Pompeian residents of various social classes gathered to exercise, socialize, conduct business, and relax, heated through sophisticated hypocaust systems, circulating hot air beneath raised floors and through hollow wall cavities, engineering already discussed in this channel's earlier coverage of Roman Britain's own frontier bathing facilities, here deployed in considerably more elaborate and more luxuriously decorated form, appropriate to a wealthy resort-adjacent provincial city with vaulted ceilings decorated in elaborate stucco relief work and, in the case of the Forum Baths' own men's changing room, a genuinely striking series of decorative terracotta figures supporting the vaulted ceiling itself, a level of architectural ornamentation applied even to what was, in essence, a piece of ordinary municipal infrastructure that later visitors and modern architectural historians alike have found genuinely remarkable. Pompeii's substantial theater complex, comprising a larger open-air theater capable of seating several thousand spectators for dramatic performances, and a smaller, roofed Odeon specifically designed for musical and poetic recitations, reflects the genuine importance that theatrical and musical entertainment held within ordinary Pompeian civic and cultural life, supplementing the more overtly violent spectacle of the amphitheater's gladiatorial games, with the more refined, though by no means always entirely decorous, entertainment of comedy, tragedy, and public recitation that Roman provincial cities across the empire commonly supported as an essential marker of genuine civic sophistication and cultural participation in the wider Greco-Roman literary tradition. The Macellum, Pompeii's principal covered food market, standing adjacent to the Forum itself, has yielded, through careful modern archaeological and biological analysis of preserved organic residues and animal bone fragments recovered from its ruins, remarkably detailed evidence regarding the specific range of foodstuffs available to ordinary Pompeian consumers, including fish, shellfish, and various cuts of meat, evidence that, combined with the considerable botanical analysis modern archaeologists have conducted on preserved plant remains recovered from gardens, storage containers, and even fossilized food residue found in cooking vessels throughout the city, has allowed researchers to reconstruct the actual Pompeian diet with a level of specific, physically evidenced detail almost entirely unmatched at any other ancient Roman archaeological site, confirming and considerably enriching the more general textual evidence about Roman cuisine available from surviving ancient culinary and agricultural writing. The city's commercial life, preserved in remarkable physical detail across dozens of excavated shops, bakeries, and food and drink establishments, reveals a genuinely vibrant and varied local economy, including numerous thermopolia, small counter-service establishments selling hot food and drink to customers directly from the street, their distinctive curved masonry counters, several still preserving the actual ceramic vessels that once held the food and drink sold within them, found remarkably intact across numerous locations throughout the city, alongside bakeries whose large stone mills and brick ovens survive in such complete condition that modern archaeologists and historians have been able to reconstruct, in considerable technical detail, exactly how ordinary Pompeian bread was actually produced. One bakery's oven, excavated in the 19th century, having been found to still contain carbonized loaves of bread, baked, but never collected by whatever customer had ordered them on that final August morning. Pompeii's considerable brothels and its extensive surviving body of sexually explicit artwork and inscriptions, subjects that generated genuine scandal and considerable official suppression among the more conservative 19th century European excavators and museum curators who first encountered this material have, in more recent decades of scholarship, come to be understood by historians as simply one further, genuinely valuable dimension of the same broader unfiltered portrait of ordinary Roman daily life and Roman attitudes toward sexuality that Pompeii's uniquely complete preservation makes available to modern historical study, evidence that, whatever its capacity to shock more conservative modern sensibilities, reflects genuine ordinary Roman cultural attitudes considerably more openly and more directly than the more carefully curated and selectively preserved literary sources that otherwise dominate modern understanding of Roman sexual and social attitudes. More broadly, the considerable wealth that Pompeii's favorable agricultural hinterland and its active regional commerce generated found its most visible physical expression in the city's numerous grand private houses and villas, ranging from modest working-class dwellings clustered around small internal courtyards to genuinely enormous aristocratic residences occupying entire city blocks. The wealthiest of these houses organized around the traditional Roman domus plan, featuring an entrance atrium open to the sky and collecting rainwater in a central basin, leading through to a peristyle garden courtyard surrounded by colonnaded walkways, around which the house's principal reception and private living spaces were arranged, a domestic architectural form whose considerable surviving examples at Pompeii provide modern architectural historians with by far the most complete physical understanding available anywhere of exactly how wealthy Roman domestic architecture actually functioned in practice. The House of the Faun, among the largest and most lavishly decorated private residences excavated anywhere at Pompeii, occupying an entire city block, and named for a small bronze statue of a dancing faun recovered from its grounds, preserved, among numerous other significant artistic treasures, the famous Alexander mosaic, an extraordinarily detailed and technically sophisticated floor mosaic depicting Alexander the Great's battle against the Persian king Darius, a work of considerable artistic and historical significance that modern scholars believe was likely copied from an earlier, now lost Hellenistic Greek painting, illustrating the genuine and considerable degree to which wealthy Pompeian residents actively collected and displayed fine Greek-influenced art as a marker of their own cultivated taste and social standing, a cultural aspiration. This same episode's later chapters on trade and daily commerce will return to in connection with the wider Mediterranean artistic and commercial networks that supplied such luxury goods to provincial Roman cities. The House of the Faun's own considerable scale, encompassing 2 full peristyle garden courtyards, in addition to its principal atrium and numerous reception rooms, and its genuinely exceptional collection of fine mosaic flooring throughout, of which the Alexander mosaic, already discussed, represents only the single most famous among numerous other high-quality surviving examples depicting various mythological and decorative subjects, has led modern art historians and archaeologists to identify the house's original owners as likely belonging to Pompeii's own most prominent and most culturally ambitious aristocratic families, individuals whose considerable wealth quite possibly derived substantially from the same wine and agricultural production already discussed in this episode's 6th chapter, allowed them to commission and display precisely the kind of sophisticated, Greek-influenced artistic program that marked genuine elite cultural standing throughout the wider Roman world of this period. The Villa of the Mysteries, standing just outside Pompeii's own city walls, among the surrounding suburban villa district, preserves what many art historians consider among the single most significant surviving examples of ancient Roman painting anywhere in the entire empire, a remarkable cycle of large-scale figural frescoes wrapping around an entire room depicting what appears to be a ritual initiation sequence connected to the mystery cult of the god Dionysus, rendered in vivid, remarkably well-preserved color against a distinctive deep red background, a work whose precise iconographic meaning and specific ritual significance remain subjects of genuine ongoing scholarly interpretation and debate, but whose sheer artistic quality and scale make it one of the most frequently reproduced and most widely studied individual works of surviving ancient Roman art. The House of the Vetii, another exceptionally well-preserved and lavishly decorated Pompeian residence, belonging to 2 apparently prosperous freedman brothers, Aulus Vettius Restitutus and Aulus Vettius Conviva, preserves an extraordinarily rich cycle of surviving wall paintings, covering virtually every room of the house, illustrating in remarkable completeness the particular decorative style modern art historians classify as the 4th Pompeian style, characterized by elaborate architectural fantasy scenes combined with mythological figural panels and and intricate decorative borders, one of 4 distinct successive decorative painting styles that modern art historians have identified and carefully sequenced through careful stylistic and stratigraphic analysis across Pompeii's surviving domestic interiors, ranging from the earliest first style, imitating the appearance of expensive marble paneling through painted plaster, through to this final, most elaborate and most theatrically illusionistic 4th style current at the time of the eruption itself, a sequence of stylistic development that provides art historians with an unusually complete and unusually well-dated case study in the evolution of ancient Roman interior, decorative painting more broadly. Pompeii's population at the time of the eruption encompassed the full range of Roman provincial society, from the wealthy landowning elite who dominated the city's own local governing council, the Ordo Decurionum, and who competed for prestige through public building donations and through election to local magistracies, including the Duumviri, who served as the city's chief annual magistrates, down through a substantial population of free craftspeople, shopkeepers, and laborers, and a genuinely significant enslaved population whose labor, though considerably less directly visible in the surviving archaeological record than that of their wealthier owners, nonetheless supported virtually every dimension of the city's domestic, agricultural, and commercial economy, a social structure whose full human diversity the eruption's own indiscriminate destruction would ultimately affect without regard to any of these same careful social and economic distinctions among the specific individuals whose names and lives modern archaeology and epigraphy have been able to at least partially reconstruct from Pompeii's surviving inscriptions and physical remains is the baker Terentius Neo, whose well-known portrait, discovered on the wall of his own house, depicting himself alongside his wife, he holding a scroll signifying his own literacy and civic standing, and she holding a wax tablet and stylus signifying her own, provides modern historians with a genuinely rare and valuable glimpse of exactly how a specific, ordinarily prosperous, but non-aristocratic Pompeian couple wished to present themselves and their own social aspirations to visitors entering their home, an aspiration toward recognized literacy and civic respectability that stood in genuinely interesting tension with Terentius Neo's own actual occupation as a baker, a trade that, while certainly commercially useful and evidently quite profitable, given the considerable size and evident prosperity of his own house, did not itself carry any particular inherent social prestige within the wider Roman social hierarchy, making this specific double portrait a genuinely valuable piece of evidence for understanding exactly how ordinary, commercially successful Pompeian tradespeople actively worked to construct and display a more elevated social self-image than their actual formal social status alone might otherwise have afforded them. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii, Herculaneum, and several neighboring settlements began, according to the detailed eyewitness account preserved in 2 surviving letters that the Roman writer Pliny the Younger composed decades later at the request of the historian Tacitus, describing events he had personally witnessed as a teenager from across the bay at Misenum, where his uncle Pliny the Elder commanded the Roman imperial fleet on the early afternoon of a day in either August or, according to more recent archaeological and manuscript evidence that has prompted considerable modern scholarly reassessment of the traditional dating, quite possibly October of the year 79, with the sudden appearance of an enormous cloud rising from the mountain's summit that Pliny the Younger, drawing on his own considerable education in natural philosophy, memorably compared in shape to an umbrella pine tree, a description so precise and so recognizable to modern volcanologists that this particular type of towering, umbrella-shaped volcanic eruption column is still formally known in scientific terminology today as a Plinian eruption, named directly in honor of Pliny's own remarkably accurate ancient description. Pliny the Elder, upon observing this same remarkable cloud from Misenum and receiving an urgent message from a friend whose villa near the base of the mountain placed her in immediate danger, ordered the Roman fleet's warships prepared and set out personally across the bay, initially intending, according to his nephew's account, primarily to observe and document this extraordinary natural phenomenon. With the same genuine scientific curiosity that had characterized his own considerable scholarly career, a career that had already produced his own vast encyclopedic natural history, a work attempting to catalog essentially the entirety of contemporary Roman knowledge about the natural world, but redirecting his voyage once the true danger facing coastal residents became apparent, sailing his ships directly toward the increasingly dangerous shoreline near Stabiae, specifically to attempt a rescue, an act of both scientific curiosity and genuine personal courage that would ultimately cost him his own life, as he died the following morning at Stabiae, apparently from the combined effects of the toxic volcanic gases and the physical strain of the ongoing catastrophe, according to his nephew's own careful second-hand account of his uncle's final hours, based on the testimony of companions who had survived alongside him. Pliny the Younger's own account describes his and his mother's harrowing experience remaining behind at Misenum across the bay even after his uncle's own departure, as the ground began shaking with increasing violence, and the sky itself darkened dramatically, even at their considerably greater distance from the mountain, prompting the two of them to flee the town alongside a considerable panicked crowd of fellow refugees, an experience the younger Pliny describes with genuinely vivid, carefully observed detail, including his account of ash falling so thickly around them that he had to periodically shake it from his own clothing to avoid being buried where he stood, and of the surrounding darkness becoming so complete that he could hear the cries and voices of fellow refugees around him without being able to see them at all. A first-hand account that, precisely because it comes from a careful, literarily skilled eyewitness observing the disaster's outer effects from a position of relative, if still genuinely frightening safety, has provided historians and volcanologists alike with an invaluable, complementary perspective to set alongside the physical archaeological evidence recovered from Pompeii and Herculaneum's own considerably more lethal ground zero experience of the same eruption. The eruption's first major phase, continuing through the afternoon and evening, following the initial eruption column's appearance, rained enormous quantities of pumice, a light porous volcanic rock, and volcanic ash down upon Pompeii and the surrounding region, accumulating according to the careful layer-by-layer analysis that modern volcanologists and archaeologists have conducted on the preserved deposit itself to a depth of several feet across Pompeii. Within just a few hours, a slow but genuinely inexorable accumulation that collapsed roofs under its combined weight, blocked doorways and streets, and prompted many, though ultimately not all, of Pompeii's residents to attempt fleeing the city during this initial, comparatively survivable phase of the disaster, carrying what possessions they could manage and, in numerous cases, documented through the physical evidence recovered by later excavation, taking shelter in what they mistakenly believed were more protected locations. Rather than attempting the difficult and increasingly dangerous journey away from the mountain entirely, the eruption's second and considerably more lethal phase began in the early hours of the following morning, when the eruption column, having grown too heavy and too unstable to sustain its own height, began to collapse, generating a series of pyroclastic flows and surges, superheated avalanches of volcanic gas, ash, and rock fragments traveling down the mountain slopes at speeds that modern volcanological modeling estimates could have exceeded 100 miles per hour and at temperatures likely exceeding several hundred degrees, a phenomenon whose specific physical mechanics and lethal effects Pliny the Younger's own eyewitness account describing events he personally experienced from the considerably greater and, as it proved, life-saving distance of Misenum across the bay could only partially capture. But that modern archaeological and volcanological analysis of the physical evidence at Pompeii and, in even more dramatic and better preserved form, at the considerably closer town of Herculaneum, has been able to reconstruct with genuinely remarkable and often quite harrowing precision. Herculaneum, positioned considerably closer to the volcano itself, but somewhat more sheltered from the initial pumice fall that so heavily affected Pompeii during the eruption's first phase, experienced a genuinely different and, in certain respects, even more sudden pattern of destruction, being spared the hours of accumulating pumice fall that gave at least some Pompeian residents the opportunity to flee, but subsequently overwhelmed directly and with essentially no warning by the same catastrophic pyroclastic flows and surges, a pattern of destruction whose specific physical evidence, including the genuinely harrowing discovery, beginning in the 1980s, of some 300 skeletal remains found sheltering within a row of vaulted stone boat chambers along what had been the town's ancient shoreline. Individuals who had evidently gathered there hoping for rescue by sea that never arrived in time, has provided volcanologists and archaeologists with some of the single, most detailed, and most physically well-preserved evidence available anywhere regarding the specific lethal mechanics of pyroclastic surge exposure on human remains. Modern estimates of the total human death toll across Pompeii, Herculaneum, and the smaller surrounding settlements affected by the eruption remain necessarily somewhat approximate, given the incomplete nature of the surviving archaeological and demographic evidence. But careful modern scholarly reconstruction generally suggests a combined death toll numbering at minimum in the several thousands out of a total regional population that had numbered considerably higher before the eruption, since the considerable numbers of skeletal remains recovered to date at both Pompeii and Herculaneum, while individually numbering in the hundreds at each site, almost certainly represent only a portion of the actual total victims, since substantial areas of both buried cities and the wider surrounding countryside, where an unknown further number of rural residents and refugees fleeing the initial eruption also perished, remain either entirely unexcavated or were, in the case of some coastal areas, permanently altered by subsequent volcanic activity and geological change in the many centuries since, a genuine and still actively researched uncertainty that modern archaeologists continue working slowly and carefully to narrow through each new season of careful, methodical excavation and survey work across the wider, affected region. These pyroclastic flows, several distinct successive surges occurring over the following hours, killed the substantial number of Pompeii's residents who had remained in the city, whether through inability to flee, a mistaken belief that shelter within their own homes offered adequate protection, or simply insufficient time once the true, rapidly escalating scale of the danger became inescapably clear, with modern forensic and archaeological analysis of the recovered victims' remains indicating that death, in the great majority of documented cases, likely came within moments of each pyroclastic surge's arrival. The sheer thermal intensity of the superheated ash and gas cloud, causing near instantaneous death through thermal shock rather than the slower, more prolonged suffocation that popular imagination has sometimes assumed characterized the disaster's actual human toll, a genuinely significant piece of more recent scientific reassessment that this episode's 7th chapter, examining the physical evidence of the victims themselves in considerably more direct detail, will explore further. The agricultural economy that sustained Pompeii and the wider Campanian region in the decades before the eruption depended substantially on the exceptional fertility of the volcanic soil blanketing Vesuvius's own lower slopes, soil whose mineral richness, the direct product of the varied geological processes that would eventually produce the mountain's catastrophic eruption, supported viticulture of a quality and productivity that made Campanian wine, and the specific wines produced on Vesuvius's own slopes in particular, genuinely prized commodities, traded across considerable distances throughout the wider Roman Mediterranean world, with surviving Pompeian wine amphorae, stamped with producers' names, and sometimes with specific vineyard designations, recovered by archaeologists at sites considerably beyond Campania itself, physical testimony to the genuine commercial reach of this specific regional agricultural product. Pompeii's own considerable garum production industry, already briefly mentioned in this episode's first chapter, represented another genuinely significant local commercial specialty. This fermented fish sauce, produced through a lengthy process of salting and fermenting small fish and fish entrails in large open vats under the Mediterranean sun, serving as one of the single most widely used seasonings across the entire Roman culinary world, in a manner functionally comparable to how salt or various fermented sauces function in numerous modern cuisines, and the considerable surviving physical and epigraphic evidence for garum production specifically associated with a Pompeian producer named Umbricius Scaurus, whose own house features prominent floor mosaics depicting labeled garum amphorae bearing his own name, illustrates the genuine local civic pride that successful commercial production of this particular specialty good could generate among Pompeii's own prosperous merchant class. The actual production process for garum involved layering small fish, often including anchovies, sardines, and mackerel, along with their entrails, in salt within large open vats, and allowing the mixture to ferment under the warm Campanian sun for a period of several weeks to several months, a process producing a strong, savory liquid condiment that, once strained and bottled in the distinctive small amphorae that Umbricius Scaurus's own workshop, apparently produced in considerable commercial volume, could be graded into several distinct quality tiers, commanding correspondingly different market prices, with the finest grade, sometimes called liquamen, reserved for the wealthiest customers' tables, and considerably cheaper, lower grades sold more broadly for everyday household cooking use, a genuinely sophisticated commercial product differentiation that modern historians of the Roman economy have found instructive when reconstructing the wider sophistication of ordinary Roman provincial commerce beyond the more frequently studied luxury goods trade in items like fine wine, silk, or imported spices. The considerable network of shops, workshops, and commercial establishments lining Pompeii's principal streets, already discussed in this episode's third chapter, in connection with the city's physical urban layout, supported a genuinely diverse local craft and retail economy extending well beyond food and drink alone, including textile production and dyeing workshops, whose considerable water and chemical requirements archaeologists have traced through surviving installations, including the large foulerie or textile cleaning and finishing workshop of Stephanus, metalworking and pottery production, and a considerable retail trade in imported luxury goods, including fine glassware, decorative bronze objects, and imported foodstuffs, including the wine, olive oil, and preserved fish products that Pompeii's own considerable maritime and riverine trade connections, linking the city to the wider Mediterranean commercial network through the nearby port facilities, serving the Bay of Naples more broadly, made readily available to Pompeian consumers of sufficient means. Pompeii's own direct commercial access to wider Mediterranean shipping networks depended substantially on the nearby Sarno River, whose mouth, located a short distance from the city itself, provided river and coastal port facilities that connected Pompeii's own considerable agricultural and manufactured exports to the wider maritime commerce flowing through the more substantial regional port at Puteoli, and from there to trading destinations across the entire Roman Mediterranean world, a river-based commercial infrastructure whose precise ancient course and specific harbor installations, modern geological and archaeological survey work conducted using core sampling and ground-penetrating radar techniques across the decades since major excavation of the city itself began, has worked to reconstruct with steadily increasing confidence, since the river's own course has shifted considerably in the many centuries since antiquity, complicating modern efforts to precisely locate Pompeii's own ancient harbor facilities relative to the city's better preserved and more thoroughly excavated inland urban core. The considerable volume of Pompeian-produced wine and garum amphorae recovered by modern archaeologists at sites scattered across the wider Western Mediterranean, including notable finds in southern Gaul and along the North African coast, provides physical confirmation of the genuine commercial reach that this specific combination of river and coastal port infrastructure allowed Pompeii's own local agricultural and manufacturing economy to achieve, a trading network whose considerable scale meant that Pompeii's own final destruction represented not merely a localized regional tragedy, but a genuine, if modest relative to the wider imperial economy, disruption to specific commercial supply chains that had, in the decades before the eruption, connected Pompeian producers to consumers scattered across a considerable portion of the entire Roman Mediterranean trading world. Daily commercial life in Pompeii followed rhythms that would have been broadly recognizable across the wider Roman urban world, with the Forum serving as the city's principal marketplace and commercial gathering point during the busiest morning hours. Individual shops and workshops typically combining retail selling space with actual production facilities and, in many documented cases, with the shopkeeper's own modest living quarters located directly behind or above the commercial space itself, a genuinely practical integration of work and domestic life that archaeological excavation of numerous individual Pompeian properties has revealed in considerable physical detail, allowing modern historians to reconstruct not merely the abstract economic structure of Pompeian commerce, but the genuinely lived, practical daily experience of the ordinary shopkeepers, craftspeople, and laborers whose collective economic activity sustained the wider city. The considerable quantity of coins, scales, and other commercial equipment recovered from Pompeii's shops and workshops, alongside the extensive surviving graffiti already discussed recording prices, debts, and informal commercial transactions scratched directly onto walls throughout the city, provides modern economic historians with an unusually detailed and unusually direct body of evidence for reconstructing the actual practical mechanics of ordinary Roman provincial commerce, evidence considerably more granular and more genuinely representative of ordinary economic activity than the comparatively rarer and more elite-focused literary and legal sources that otherwise dominate modern scholarly understanding of the wider Roman economy. A further significant dimension of the same broader, unfiltered historical value that this episode's third chapter already identified as one of Pompeii's single most important contributions to modern historical understanding of ordinary ancient Roman life. The considerable number of human remains recovered from Pompeii across the many decades of the site's ongoing archaeological excavation, together with the somewhat smaller but, in certain important physical respects, even better preserved collection of remains recovered from the nearby town of Herculaneum, has allowed modern archaeologists, forensic scientists, and volcanologists to reconstruct, with an intimacy and a specificity almost entirely without parallel anywhere else in ancient historical study, both the precise physical mechanisms of death that the eruption's various phases inflicted upon its victims and, through careful skeletal and, in Pompeii's own case, through a genuinely unique preservation technique. This chapter will examine in considerable detail something approaching the actual individual physical appearance and final bodily posture of specific, named and unnamed victims at the precise moment of their own deaths. The technique that has made Pompeii's own victim remains so uniquely famous and so uniquely evocative to modern visitors and modern popular imagination alike was developed by the Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli, who directed excavations at Pompeii beginning in 1863 and who recognized that the volcanic ash surrounding many of the recovered skeletal remains had, over the many centuries following the eruption, hardened around the victims' original bodies, while the actual soft tissue decomposed away entirely, leaving behind precise void spaces within the hardened ash matrix that preserved, in remarkable and often deeply moving physical detail, the exact original shape, posture, and even in some cases, the facial expression and clothing folds of the actual victims at the specific moment of their deaths, a preservation phenomenon that Fiorelli's own considerable technical ingenuity allowed him to exploit by carefully injecting liquid plaster into these void spaces before excavating around the resulting cast, producing a genuinely startling and enduringly famous series of plaster figures capturing individual human beings, and in several instances family groups and even dogs and other animals in the precise final postures of their own deaths. Among the numerous individual plaster casts that Fiorelli's technique and its later refinements have produced, several have achieved particular and enduring fame within both scholarly and popular accounts of the disaster, including a cast frequently described as the muleteer, apparently caught while attempting to shield his face with his own arm, and a poignant group of casts recovered from what archaeologists have identified as a single family unit, adults and children found together in a manner strongly suggesting they had remained together, whether by choice or by simple physical necessity, through the disaster's final catastrophic moments. Images that, reproduced in countless subsequent photographs, documentaries, and museum exhibitions across the many decades since their original excavation, have done more than perhaps any other single category of surviving ancient evidence to make the human, individual scale of the Pompeii disaster immediately and viscerally comprehensible to modern audiences who might otherwise struggle to grasp the disaster's abstract statistical scale in any genuinely felt, emotionally direct way. These plaster casts, numbering several dozen produced across the many decades since Fiorelli's original technique was first developed and refined, and more recently supplemented by an updated technique using clear resin that allows modern researchers to conduct detailed internal examination of the victim's actual preserved skeletal remains without destroying the external cast itself, a methodological refinement that has permitted considerably more sophisticated modern forensic analysis than Fiorelli's original 19th century plaster technique allowed. Depict victims caught in a genuinely wide range of final postures and circumstances, including individuals apparently attempting to shield their faces or protect children in their final moments, groups of people who had evidently sought shelter together, and, in one particularly well-known and frequently reproduced example, a dog still wearing its studded collar, caught twisted in evident agony, a specific individual image that has become, for many modern visitors and viewers encountering photographs of the Pompeii excavations, one of the single most emotionally affecting physical artifacts surviving from the entire ancient world. The discovery of the boat chamber skeletons at Herculaneum, already briefly mentioned in this episode's 5th chapter, in connection with that town's own somewhat different pattern of destruction, deserves fuller attention here, in connection with this chapter's wider examination of the disaster's human physical evidence, since these particular remains, preserved not through Fiorelli's plaster casting technique, but through direct skeletal survival within the dense volcanic material that had filled the vaulted chambers where these individuals had gathered, have provided forensic researchers with unusually well-preserved actual bone material, as opposed to the void space casts that Pompeii itself more typically yields, allowing considerably more direct chemical and isotopic analysis of the victim's own skeletal remains, research that has permitted modern scientists to draw detailed conclusions regarding these specific individuals' general health, diet, and even, in several cases, their likely geographic and ethnic origins, based on careful isotopic analysis of preserved tooth enamel, a level of individual biographical reconstruction considerably beyond what the plaster casts of Pompeii itself, valuable as they are for capturing external bodily posture, can typically provide regarding the actual internal biological history of the specific individuals they preserve. Modern forensic and volcanological analysis of these remains, conducted with increasing scientific sophistication across recent decades, has significantly revised earlier scholarly assumptions regarding the specific manner of most victims' deaths, with careful analysis of skeletal evidence, including the specific coloration and condition of preserved bone and dental tissue, indicating that the great majority of Pompeii's victims died from the near instantaneous thermal effects of direct exposure to the superheated pyroclastic surges already discussed in this episode's 5th chapter, rather than from the slower process of ash suffocation that earlier generations of researchers working from Fiorelli's original plaster casts alone without the benefit of this more recent detailed forensic analysis had more commonly assumed. A scientific reassessment that, while in one sense somewhat less prolonged and agonizing than the earlier suffocation theory implied, nonetheless confirms the genuinely catastrophic and overwhelming violence of the specific pyroclastic events that the mountain's collapsing eruption column unleashed upon the city during the disaster's final and most lethal phase. The considerable ongoing scholarly and ethical debate surrounding the continued public display of these plaster casts and the actual human skeletal remains they contain, a debate this episode approaches with the same careful, appropriately cautious framing that its earlier coverage of similarly sensitive archaeological human remains elsewhere has consistently maintained, reflects genuine and continuing tension between the plaster cast's undeniable historical, scientific, and educational value, and the legitimate ethical questions that continued public exhibition of actual human remains, however many centuries removed from their own original deaths, genuinely raises a tension that Pompeii's own site management and the wider Italian archaeological authorities responsible for the site's ongoing conservation continue to navigate through carefully considered, periodically revised policies regarding exactly which remains are displayed, how they are contextualized for visitors, and what degree of continued scientific study, including the more recent resin casting technique already discussed, remains appropriate to conduct upon them. Pompeii and its neighboring buried towns remained almost entirely forgotten, their precise locations lost to reliable local memory for well over 16 centuries following the eruption, known only through the scattered and often quite vague references preserved in surviving ancient literary sources, including Pliny the Younger's own eyewitness letters, already extensively discussed throughout this episode, until the accidental rediscovery of the considerably deeper buried town of Herculaneum in the early 18th century, when workers digging a well in the nearby town of Resina struck ancient marble fragments, prompting the first tentative, and by later archaeological standards genuinely quite destructive, excavation efforts undertaken initially more in the spirit of treasure hunting for the personal collections of the ruling Bourbon monarchy than in the spirit of systematic scientific archaeological inquiry that would only gradually develop across the following decades and centuries. Pompeii's own more systematic excavation began somewhat later, in 1748, and proceeded across the following century and a half, through a series of successive excavation campaigns of steadily improving methodological sophistication from the comparatively crude and selectively focused treasure hunting approach that characterized much of the site's earliest 18th century excavation through to the genuinely transformative reforms that Giuseppe Fiorelli introduced beginning in 1863, already discussed in this episode's preceding chapter, in connection with his famous plaster casting technique, but whose broader methodological significance extended considerably further, including his introduction of systematic, carefully documented excavation proceeding methodically block by block across the site rather than the earlier, considerably more haphazard approach of simply tunneling toward whatever promising features earlier excavators happened to encounter, an approach that transformed Pompeii's ongoing excavation from something closer to organized treasure hunting into something considerably closer to genuine modern scientific archaeological practice. The considerable 18th and 19th century rediscovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum exercised an extraordinary and genuinely wide-ranging influence on European art, architecture, and design during exactly this same period, directly fueling the neoclassical artistic and architectural movement that swept across Europe and, eventually, the wider Western world during the later 18th and early 19th centuries as artists, architects, and wealthy patrons who had personally visited or who had encountered published illustrations and descriptions of the excavated Pompeian ruins incorporated distinctly Pompeian decorative motifs, color schemes, and architectural forms into everything from fashionable furniture and interior decoration to major public architectural commissions, including the specific shade of deep red, still commonly referred to as Pompeian red, derived directly from the distinctive background color of numerous surviving Pompeian wall paintings, which became a genuinely fashionable, decorative color choice across elite European interiors throughout the 19th century, a genuinely significant instance of an ancient archaeological rediscovery directly and quite dramatically reshaping contemporary artistic and cultural taste across an entire continent within just a few decades of the site's own initial rediscovery. Pompeii's rediscovery coincided closely with and substantially helped fuel the broader cultural phenomenon of the Grand Tour, the extended educational journey through Italy and other significant European cultural centers that wealthy young British and other Northern European aristocrats increasingly undertook throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries as an essential component of a genteel classical education, with a visit to the newly excavated ruins at Pompeii and Herculaneum becoming, within just a few decades of the site's initial rediscovery, one of the single most sought-after and most frequently documented experiences that any self-respecting grand tourist could hope to include in their own considerable itinerary, generating an enormous body of contemporary travel writing, personal correspondence, and commissioned artwork depicting the sites, further amplifying the already considerable European cultural fascination with the newly rediscovered ancient cities that this same chapter's preceding discussion of neoclassical artistic influence has already examined in some detail. Modern Pompeii, now one of the most heavily visited archaeological sites and tourist destinations anywhere in the world, faces genuinely significant and ongoing conservation challenges, since the same extensive excavation that has revealed so much of the ancient city's physical remains has also exposed those same remains, after nearly 2,000 years of protective burial beneath their original volcanic covering, to the accelerating, deteriorating effects of weather, tourist foot traffic, and, in several well-documented and genuinely controversial incidents across recent decades, actual structural collapse of insufficiently maintained excavated buildings, prompting the Italian government and international conservation organizations, including UNESCO, which formally designated Pompeii a World Heritage Site in 1997, to fund increasingly substantial and increasingly systematic modern conservation and structural stabilization efforts across the site, including the major Great Pompeii project, launched in the 2010s, specifically to address the site's accumulated conservation backlog through a combination of European Union and Italian national government funding. Pompeii's own considerable modern history of damage and conservation extended beyond the ordinary slow deterioration already discussed in this chapter to include genuine additional destruction inflicted during the Second World War, when Allied bombing raids targeting German and Italian military positions in the surrounding region struck the archaeological site itself on several occasions in 1943, damaging or destroying a number of previously excavated structures, including significant damage to the very antiquarium museum building that had housed some of the site's own most fragile and most significant recovered artifacts, and in a particularly regrettable episode that later conservators have specifically documented, destroying a considerable quantity of excavated artifacts that had been stored on site awaiting cataloging and museum transfer. A further, considerably more recent layer of destruction and loss superimposed upon the ancient catastrophe that this episode's preceding chapters have examined in such considerable detail, illustrating that Pompeii's own long history of vulnerability to sudden violent destruction did not, in fact, end entirely with the ancient eruption itself. Modern conservation and research efforts at Pompeii increasingly employ sophisticated digital technologies, including laser, scanning, and photogrammetry, to create detailed three-dimensional digital models of the site's excavated structures, allowing conservators and researchers to monitor structural deterioration with considerably greater precision than traditional visual inspection alone permits, alongside the increasing use of ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive geophysical survey techniques to study still unexcavated portions of the ancient city, including a considerable area in the city's own eastern quarter that remains entirely unexcavated to this day, without the destructive and often irreversible impact that traditional excavation methods necessarily involve. A methodological shift toward non-invasive and digitally documented investigation that reflects a broader, genuinely significant evolution in modern archaeological practice more generally, increasingly prioritizing the preservation of archaeological evidence in its original undisturbed context, wherever possible, over the more traditional but inherently more destructive imperative to physically excavate and expose everything that a given site might potentially contain. Vesuvius itself, meanwhile, remains an active volcano today, its last significant eruption having occurred in 1944, and modern volcanologists and Italian civil protection authorities continue to monitor the mountain closely, given the genuinely enormous modern population, numbering in the several millions across the densely urbanized modern Naples metropolitan area, now living within the mountain's own potential future eruption danger zone, a sobering modern echo of exactly the same combination of fertile volcanic land and dense human settlement that made the original 79 eruption so catastrophically lethal, and one that has prompted the development of detailed, if still genuinely challenging and logistically complex, modern evacuation planning intended to prevent, as much as modern science and civil planning genuinely can, any future recurrence of the specific human catastrophe that this episode has spent its preceding 7 chapters carefully reconstructing from the volcano's own last, considerably better documented eruption nearly 2,000 years ago. And so, we leave Pompeii resting in the ashen pumice of nearly 2,000 years. We walked the streets of a genuinely ordinary Roman provincial city, past bakeries and wine bars and walls covered in the casual, scratched jokes and election slogans of people who had no idea their own daily complaints and daily affections would still be readable 2 millennia later, love notes and insults and campaign endorsements scratched by hands that had no way of knowing how long their small, careless words would actually survive. We stood in the grand houses of the city's wealthiest families, beneath mosaics depicting Alexander the Great and frescoes whose exact ritual meaning scholars still quietly argue about, and we felt the particular texture of a city's ordinary economic life, its garum vats and its fulling workshops, and its shopkeepers living directly behind their own modest storefronts, an entire working city's worth of small, ordinary human ambition, preserved by pure accident in the very ash that ended it. We watched the mountain wake, and we followed young Pliny's own careful, decades later, account of his uncle's final voyage across the bay, sailing directly toward a danger that scientific curiosity and simple human decency together compelled him to approach rather than flee. And we stood beside the nephew himself as he and his mother fled Misenum through ash falling so thick he had to shake it from his own shoulders, the sky gone darker than any night either of them had ever known. We stood among the plaster casts that Fiorelli's own remarkable technique first revealed to the modern world, and we considered, with appropriate care, both what those casts can genuinely tell us and the real, still unresolved questions about how respectfully we ought to keep looking at them. We felt the wound of that final catastrophic morning when the sky itself went dark at noon, and we stood at the very end, quietly beside a mountain that has gone back, for now, to looking exactly as green and as harmless as it did the day before it wasn't. These are human stories. The bakers and the priests and the wealthy villa owners were human, caught by something none of them could have seen coming, and none of them, in the end, could outrun. Ordinary people who woke that particular August or October morning expecting nothing more than the usual small business of an ordinary Roman day: bread to bake, accounts to settle, a market to visit, a garden to tend, and the city that a mountain buried in a single terrible day has given every generation since a way to remember them, not as distant historical abstractions, but as people who left bread in an oven and jokes on a wall and a dog straining at its collar, all of it still there, waiting in the dark for someone to finally come looking. If this journey brought you some calm, you might like the video, or subscribe to the channel, or leave a small quiet comment below. It helps others find their way here, and every person who finds their way here is one more person sleeping a little more gently tonight, carrying just a little more of that same quiet, Campanian evening air along with them into their own rest, there is another story waiting for you on the screen. You can simply let it play and let the night continue, and let the old world keep talking in its old slow voice, one buried city and one quiet mountain after another, for as long as you care to keep listening. But for now, there is nothing left to follow. The mountain has gone quiet again. The ash has long since settled. The lamps of the buried city, wherever they once burned, have been dark now for a very long time. The bread still sitting uncollected in its oven. The wine still sitting half poured in its cup. Let your jaw unclench, slowly, fully. Let your shoulders drop, and let them stay dropped for as long as you need. Let your hands open slowly, the way hands open when there is finally nothing left to carry and nowhere left to run, nothing left to do, now but rest. Let your breathing find its own quiet rhythm, slow and steady, in and out, like the warm evening air still moving gently across the Bay of Naples, patient and old and entirely at peace with everything it has ever seen, everything it watched happen on that one last ordinary morning, and everything it has quietly watched over in the many centuries since. Sleep well, and good night. Wherever in this quiet world tonight's old story finds you resting, somewhere beneath the modern town that has grown up around it, and beneath the still unexcavated slopes of the mountain itself, the rest of that last ordinary morning is still down there, patient in the ash, waiting the way it always has, for whoever next thinks to come looking for it. However many more centuries that patient waiting eventually turns out to take,